Chapter 39. The women of Mormondom in the period of the Utah War, their heroic resolve to desolate the land, the Second Exodus, Mrs. Carrington, Governor Cummings' wife, a nation of heroes. For an example of the heroism of woman excelling all other examples of history, at least of modern times, let us turn to that of the Mormon women during the Utah War. In the expulsions from Missouri, first from county to county, and then en masse from the state, undoubtedly the Mormons yielded to the compulsion of a lawless mob, coupled with the militia of the state, executing the exterminating order of Governor Boggs. It was an example of suffering and martyrdom rather than of spontaneous heroism. Something of the same was illustrated in the expulsion from Illinois. It was at the outset nothing of choice, but all of compulsion. True, after the movement of the community, inspired by the apostolic forcefulness of Brigham Young and his compeers, swelled into a grand Israelitish exodus, then the example towered like a very pyramid of heroism. And in that immortal circumstance, who can doubt that the heroic culminated in the women? But what shall be said of their example during the Utah War? Here were women who chose and resolved to give an example to the civilized world such as it had never seen. The proposed exodus from Utah was not in the spirit of submission, but an exhibition of an invincible spirit finding a method of conquest through an exodus. This was not weakness, but strength. It was as though the accumulated might and concentrated purposes of their lives were brought into a supreme action. The example of the Utah War was in fact all their own. The Mormons were not subdued. Had the issue come, they would have left Utah as conquerors. Tell the government that the troops now on the march for Utah shall not enter the Great Salt Lake Valley. Tell the people of the United States that should those troops force an entrance, they will find Utah a desert, every house burned to the ground, every tree cut down, and every field laid waste. We will apply the torch to our own dwellings, cut down those richly laden orchards with our own hands, turn the fruitful field again into a desert, and desolate our cities with acclamations. Such was the tenor of the communication carried by Captain Van Vliet to the government. And he had seen the whole people lift up their hands in their tabernacle to manifest their absolute resolution to the nation, and heard those acclamations in anticipation of their act. The very nature of the case brought the women of Mormondom into supreme prominence. Their hands would have applied the torches to their homes. They would have been the desolators of the fast-growing cities of Utah. The grandeur of the action was in these unconquerable women who would have maintained their religion and their sacred institutions in the face of all the world. The example of the wife of Albert Carrington will, perchance, be often recalled, generations hence. Captain Van Vliet of the United States Army had arrived in Salt Lake City in the midst of the troubles out of which grew the war. He was received most cordially by the authorities, but at the same time was given to understand that the people were a unit and that they had fully determined upon a program. The sisters took him into their gardens and showed him the paradise that their woman hands would destroy if the invading army came. He was awed by the prospect, his ordinary judgment confounded by such extraordinary examples. To the lady above mentioned, in whose garden he was one day walking, in conversation with the governor and others, he exclaimed, "What, madam? Would you consent to see this beautiful home in ashes and this fruitful orchard destroyed?" "Yes," answered Sister Carrington, with heroic resolution, "I would not only consent to it, but I would set fire to my home with my own hands, and cut down every tree, and root up every plant." Coupled with this will be repeated the dramatic incident of Governor Cummings' wife weeping over the scene of the deserted city after the community had partly executed their resolution. The saints had all gone south with their leader when Governor Cumming, with his wife, returned from Camp Scott. They proceeded to the residence of Elder Staines, whom they found in waiting. His family had gone south, and in his garden were significantly heaped several loads of straw. The governor's wife inquired their meaning and the cause of the silence that pervaded the city. Elder Staines informed her of their resolve to burn the town in case the army attempted to occupy it. "How terrible!" she exclaimed. "What a sight this is! I shall never forget it. It has the appearance of a city that has been afflicted with plague. Every house looks like a tomb of the dead. For 2 miles I have seen but one man in it. Poor creatures! And so all have left their hard-earned homes." Here she burst into tears. "Oh, Alfred, To her husband, something must be done to bring them back. Do not permit the army to stay in the city. Can't you do something for them? Yes, madam, said he, I shall do all I can, rest assured. Mrs. Cumming wept for woman. But the women of Mormondom gloried in their sublime action as they had never done before. They felt at that moment that their example was indeed worthy of a modern Israel. It thus struck the admiration of journalists both in America and Europe. The Mormons were pronounced a nation of heroes. Those heroes were twice 10,000 women who could justly claim the tribute equally with their husbands, their brethren, and their sons.